This morning we are looking here at Proverbs chapter 1, beginning at verse 1. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." There was a businessman who was teaching his son about how he should take care of the family business after he's gone. Integrity and wisdom, he said to his son, these are the keys to business success. By integrity, I mean that when you promise the delivery of merchandise on a certain day, you must do so even if it bankrupts you. "Well," the son replied, "what's wisdom?" "Don't make such promises." The opening paragraph here that we just read in the book of Proverbs summarizes the message of the whole book there in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. There are two contrasting ways to live. First, there is the way of the wise. The wise person, the one who is really in the know, lives his or her life in relationship with God. We should realize that we can believe in God and yet still be a fool. Wisdom has to do with our relationship with God, however. To begin with, we should fear the Lord. In a relational sense, we should fear the Lord. Both the word fear and the special name for God, the Lord, demonstrate that living wisely means living your life in a relationship with God. It's not ritual, it's not religion, it's relationship. It's relationship. The word fear has both negative and positive aspects to it. Negatively, of course, fear means dread and terror. Positively, though, it means awe and reverence. So the wise person lives in the fear of the Lord in the sense of awe or reverence. That person being drawn by the beauty of the radiance of the Lord's presence, yet not overstepping those bounds into a familiarity that would be inappropriate. But not only should we fear the Lord in a relational sense, we should also fear the Lord in a universal sense. This fear of the Lord extends to every part of our lives, not just to some religious dimension, not just to Sunday or Wednesday or some particular kind of activity. Why? Well, because the Lord is the creator and governor of all things which reflect and display his purpose and design. So Proverbs 3 tells us in verse 19, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, by understanding he established the heavens, by his knowledge the deeps were broken up, and the skies drip with dew." So the wise person who lives in this fear, this reverence of the Lord, lives in harmony with the world God has created. Our very lives belong to God, and we must live in obedience to God and in dependence upon God. There are a great many actions which in and of themselves are neither right nor wrong. They're made right when we act in love, seeking to be obedient to the Lord. They become wrong if we act in selfishness. We act for our own benefit. It's really kind of like playing the guitar or the piano. There's no right note, there's no wrong note. It depends on the context. The context. Okay? They all sound good together there, don't they? Did that sound good? Depends on the context, right? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once... The context, right? There's no right or wrong unless you're out of context, right? That's where the context comes in. So we need to understand that in the same way, the choices that we make become right or wrong based on the motivation behind it, based on this context. Okay, so we said that there are two contrasting ways to live. The first way was the way of the wise, and now we'll discuss the way of the fool. Listen to this advice from a wise father to his son here in Proverbs, now chapter 3, verse 1. I see each of those has that scrolling on it, right? Okay, I'm going to have to look for that in the future. Proverbs 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, there's that fear again. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. The way of the fool is already obvious, isn't it? Because it's diametrically opposed to the way of the wise. It's obviously foolish to live in rebellion or in opposition to God passively by just trying to ignore him, as many people do, and actively by directly disobeying. You know what he says, and yet you're going to go against it and do what you want, disobeying him outright. We need to recognize two things about this. First, humans have all chosen the fool's way. All of us have all chosen the fool's way. Psalm 14, 1 through 3 says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. The Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. We've all been lumped into the same group, haven't we? Human history is full of foolish, rebellious acts against God. Beginning with our first parents, Adam and Eve, who chose to disobey the Creator's instructions and eat that forbidden fruit. They believed the serpent instead of God. They believed that in eating it they would all become wise like God. The promise, of course, was broken. Satan lied, and we believed that. Harmony of God's perfect creation was disrupted as sin and death entered the world. The relationship with God for which human beings were made was broken. That promise of life eternal with God wasn't there anymore. Secondly, we need to understand that humans are without excuse for choosing the fool's way. In Romans 1, 18 through 23, Paul said, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him or as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. We're so foolish. From this passage, we see that being religious does not make us wise. We can be religious fools, and many people are today. We were created to be worshipers, that's so. The problem is that we want a religion where we're in control, a God who will legitimatize, if you will, how we want to live. A God that we can manipulate to do what we want. So we make and worship idols and dethrone the true God from his rightful place in our lives and in our society. This is indeed foolishness. To be wise, we need to worship the one true living God. I read a story that I think makes a very good point concerning wisdom and foolishness in living. It seems that a prophetess came to Tarquinius Superbus, king of Rome. She brought 9 volumes of a book, demanding a high price for these books, these 9 books. Thinking it too much, the king refused, and she immediately burned 3 of the books, demanding for the remaining 6 the price of the 9. He still declined to give it, and she burned 3 more, asking the full sum for the remaining 3 books. Thinking there must be something extraordinary in these books and fearing to lose them all, he finally gave for the 3 the price he had refused for the 9. So what can we learn from such a story? Well, time, you see it's passing us by. Time, as it dwindles, grows more valuable, doesn't it? There are 3 divisions of life: youth, adulthood, and old age. And ministers advise us to redeem all of that time. Youth, adulthood, old age, don't let any of it pass you by frivolously at a loss. But in youth, we imagine that the price we're required to pay in self-denial is too great, and so we spend our time in folly. In adulthood, we're again advised to redeem the remainder, but still we think the price too great, and then perhaps when it comes to that last stage of our lives, we're glad enough to redeem what remains. But here, in this stage of life, it's different. The prophetess still demanded but the same price for the remaining 3, which she'd asked for all 9, but the old, if they're induced to redeem the time at all, which is very unlikely at this point, will have to pay more for the last 3 volumes than they were asked for the whole 9 at first. The habit of sinning so greatly increases the difficulty of turning to the Lord that at that stage it's often impossible. Don't be foolish. Please don't be foolish. Turn to Jesus now. Now's the best time. Redeem the whole life now. So there are only these 2 ways to live, really. The way of the wise, the way of the fool. We've all chosen the wrong option, resulting in tragic consequences. Pain, death. That's the bad news. The New Testament gives us the good news, the gospel, which means, of course, good news. Rather than leaving us to suffer the consequences of our foolish rebellion, which we fully deserve, God stepped into our fallen world in human flesh, of course, in the person of Jesus Christ. And for the first time in human history, since Adam fell, a human being, Jesus, perfectly lived the way of the wise. In perfect harmony with the Creator's design, in perfect obedience to the Father's will, he lived that perfect life. Now, beyond the evidence of God's character seen in creation and in his will as revealed to Israel, God finally spoke and decisively spoke through his son Jesus, his last and best word. When Jesus died on the cross, we know that he paid the price for our rebellion and made a way by which we can be reconciled to God. Our sins can be forgiven, providing that we lay down our arms and submit fully to the authority of God. I beg you, if you haven't made that decision, to do that today. The wisest decision you'll ever make is to surrender to Jesus Christ, to surrender to God. You know, I was thinking the other day about the Wizard of Oz. Anybody like that story, The Wizard of Oz? It's a story as a child we love to be afraid during that story. A lot of fearful things in that movie, especially in those days. Remember when Dorothy's house landed in Munchkin Land, hitting and killing the Wicked Witch of the North, and just threw all of the Munchkins into this gala celebration, singing and dancing and all that went on. When we went from black and white to color, it was just a marvelous thing. Really, people today don't get the full impact of that because color just came in at that point. So it was a big deal for us. But all that Dorothy wanted to know, remember? All she asked, how do I get home? I want to go home. How do I go back home? And of course the Munchkins didn't know. They told her she needed to go to the wisest person in the land, of course the Wizard of Oz. Ask him. If anybody knows, he knows. And they told her the way to get to Oz, where he lives, is how? Follow the yellow brick road. That's the way. It began at the very point where Dorothy's house had landed, spiraled out like a bullseye, and eventually headed towards Oz. Stay on the yellow brick road, they said, and you'll eventually get to where you're wanting to go. One road to Oz. There wasn't multiple roads, just one road to Oz. And it began right there, and to stay on it would take her all the way to Oz, and to depart from this road, of course, would take her any place but Oz. If you want to get to Oz, you have to follow the yellow brick road to the final destination. The principle is true, too, of having and living a rewarding life. The beginning point, the origin of the yellow brick road leading to a rewarding life, is reverence for God. That's where we must start. Reverence for God. The fear of the Lord, we read, is the beginning of knowledge. And knowledge leads to wisdom, prudence, and discretion, which in turn lead to a pleasing, happy, joyful life. Start with reverence for God. Stay on the road of knowledge and wisdom and prudence and discretion, following them to their ultimate destination, and you will arrive in the land of a pleasing life, an abundant life, Jesus called it. That's the meaning of the message of the book of Proverbs. And then, before we close this morning, let me take us on one final journey into an old movie, one of my favorites. The Adventures of Robin Hood. You remember that one? Some of us boys, man, we had the swords out. We wanted to shoot arrows. That was a fun time. Living in the trees, imagine that. That was a 1938 movie starring Errol Flynn. And of course, the movie happened long before my time. Just want to make that clear. But they were still rerunning it when I was a boy. Of course, I loved it. Errol Flynn, Robin Hood, the legendary English hero. They were conducting guerrilla warfare from Sherwood Forest against Prince John, who was the younger brother of King Richard the Lionhearted. Richard had left the country and was on a crusade to the Holy Land, leaving England in the hands of his younger brother, who taxed the people of England beyond reason and pocketed the money himself. Robin, we know, stole from the rich, which would be Prince John and all of his cohorts, and gave the money back to the poor, the common people from whom the money was taken in the first place, as Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham tried to eliminate Robin because he was messing up their plan. After years of absence, King Richard returned to England disguised as a common traveler, and the men of Sherwood Forest ended up capturing King Richard and took him to Robin Hood. King Richard asked Robin if he supported the king's crusade to the Holy Land, and Robin's reply, of course, was that he did not support the king since he left England in the hands of the wicked Prince John. Well, he wanted to know then next, so are you loyal to King Richard? And Robin's reply told it all. He said, I'll lay my life down for him. He was loyal to the king, he just didn't like the things he was doing. And so, assured that he was safe among loyalists, King Richard removed his outer robe, revealing the royal armor that he was wearing beneath the robe. Robin and his men were, of course, astonished to reveal and to realize that they were in the presence of their king, and they immediately dropped to one knee, bowed in silence before their monarch, showing respect and reverence and awe. These were the responses of people who knew who they were and knew who their king was. Today, I'm afraid Americans are hardly capable of that kind of respect. We've so flattened our world, bringing leaders down to our own level, that we would be more apt to high-five a king than we would to kneel before one. Unfortunately, the same is true of our capacity to revere God. We tend to treat him in the same way. Americans are unable to offer God the reverence that marks the beginning point of wisdom. And you see, we need to get back to that place. As a result, we are unwise people. Dare I say it? We're foolish. One reason for the lack of respect in America is that no one person has any great authority over us. Litigation, politically correct tolerance, labor strikes, mass demonstrations, you name it, all these kinds of things have removed any sense in America that anyone is ever over us as individuals. Respect in ancient England was heightened by the realization that the king had unquestioned power of life and death in his hands. The king was respected because he deserved respect. The welfare of the common man depended upon his respect for his king. The same is true with God. His sovereignty is unquestioned, or it should be, and carries with it power of life and death, heaven and hell, blessing and cursing. If we're in touch with reality, we understand the logic, the importance, the necessity of revering and respecting God. In his hands lies our eternal destiny. Jeremiah said, it is because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed. The person who is doctrinally sound, believes all the right things, the person who is in touch with reality is a person who reveres God and cultivates the capacity for reverence to God, respect for God. Not only is reverence for God a good thing in and of itself, it also places us at the beginning of the yellow brick road that leads us to wisdom. Please jump on this road to wisdom by falling on your knees before a holy God. If you've never done that before and received his forgiveness of sin through Christ, you can do that today. We invite you to trust Jesus as your Savior. If you have, but you've kind of gotten away from it, we need to, all of us, rededicate and recommit ourselves to respecting God and reverencing God and exalting Jesus Christ as his only begotten Son. You can come to Christ right now, today. We're going to sing Just As I Am. Let's turn ourselves more fully to the Lord than we ever have before and respect Him with all our might. Let's stand together as we sing.